Hello everyone, this is the FlexRC Ascent X. I built mine using the Gem Fan 1105 7500 kV motors, SpedX fly stack, the 1S100 fly stack, 20 amp ESC, F4 flight controller with an OSD, 25 100 milliwatt VTX. Also used the CATX F1 turbo micro camera, Gem Fan 2540 props, and the iFlight battery strap. Mine weighs 76.36 grams. Bottom plate looks to be 2 millimeters, and the cage plates look to be 2 millimeters too. Motor post to motor post looks like 135 millimeters.
Land already.
I did soft mount this one. You can barely see it, but right down here are some of these soft mounts. They look like this little guy right here, and they're Maytech branded. And then I also added a little bit of an O-ring on top, so the whole stack is soft mounted. And the soft mounting isn't perfect by any stretch, but this does give us some vibration dampening throughout our flight stack. Now remember, this flight stack does use pins. We see that? Maybe. Right back in there is the pin between the ESC and the flight controller, and then right here is our pins between the flight controller and the ESC. You can see I just have the one wire going from this connector for the OSD, and I have powered the camera off of the VTX. This VTX to operate can be a little bit of a challenge because it uses little light flashing as an indicator. It's kind of a light flashing menuing system, so I think you have to press this 3 seconds and then let it off 3 times. Both lights come on when you're pressing it, and then you let go of it to get to the next one. So you keep doing that, press for 3 seconds, both lights come on, and then come back off, and then you let go, and you press it again to keep stepping through. So you go from, I believe it's band, channel, and then power. I switched out to the CATX camera. I have been using a lot of the Foxy or Predator cameras, the micros, and I've kind of become disenchanted with their cloudy light handling, I should say. I still have those, and I'm experimenting with various settings. I don't think I found anything that really fixes that issue, and some of you have commented on past videos on how it just looked kind of all washed out and kind of drab. And in some of those days, it was just because we didn't have much light and how the camera handles that. Other days where it's full light, it handles much better. But now that we're getting greenery outside, I'm noticing that also there is a harsh flashing in that camera. And I have several builds with that camera in there if you're not familiar with the channel and the content here. I actually have 2 of the FlexRCs, and as far as the build goes, the build's pretty straightforward. Now, how I did this one is a little bit different. Normally, I put the flight control or the ESC down and the motors down, and then I solder everything. I actually built the flight stack outside of the machine and then put the entire flight stack inside. And then because the ESC pads are right here on the outside and they are relatively easy to reach, then I just did my soldering for the motor leads after the fact. So that kind of made this installation a little bit more easy, but you have to be sure you've got everything correct before you put it in, and you can't really power things on before you put it in. I did put the battery lead before I put it in, as well as the capacitor back here. You can see we get good camera protection. This is a slightly change in design for FlexRC. Typically in the past they've been much more rounded. This has a little bit of a point for this protection down here. So if you happen to be trying to bail out of a move, or maybe you're doing a dive and over a tree and you don't get as far away from the tree as you thought you might when you nose up, this will help protect it. And I guess in extreme cases this one might come into play when you're going full front force into something by chance. As far as the frame rigidity goes, it's something oftentimes people want to know. This one, while it may appear somewhat flexible, it's actually more rigid than other frames that I have tested with that are just 2 millimeters. And then you can take a look at the weave here at the bottom for your own satisfaction and purposes. While we're looking at the bottom, note that they made some change, or Dimitri made some changes here on how this assembles. This used to be clear at the rear of the frame, and it is a challenge to get these things in here. You can actually see right there. On this particular one, I used my diamond file, and I filed this section down right here in the front, because when I built this one, you might be able to tell how it's kind of not straight across the back, how it's kind of angled. I had some difficulties just brute forcing it in. I didn't want to start, pulling any of the layers apart. And if we look at it this way, you might be able to tell how it's not quite straight up and down. And that was why I decided to do some filing. Now, I did just a little bit of filing, but you can kind of get an idea how much filing I did, because that notch, that I believe is the original depth that was there. But I think this design will actually create a more secure pod. It's a little bit of a challenge to get in there. We've talked a little bit about tape and getting our ESC wires down. I bought some bookbinding tape, and I don't think that stuff is it. And I don't suggest you buy any bookbinding tape, because cutting it down I found is a pain in the backside. So still looking for tape. And many of you have made suggestions. I just haven't received the stuff that I have ordered based on your suggestions yet to try out. There's been a number of different things, everything from athletic tape to tennis or baseball bat grips, which I don't think it's that, because that stuff is generally a lot more thicker and it's going to be heavier and it's kind of squishy because it's made for hand comfort. But you guys have made some suggestions, and I'm going to try them until I find what I'm looking for. You might be curious about why I didn't use the UAB or the Airblade battery strap, and this one was ever so slightly lighter, and that's what I was going for in this build. I wanted to build something that was very, very light, because I think that we've kind of gotten away in many of our frames and designs, and quite frankly our motors, to where we're adding more weight to our vehicles, and when we fly fast and then we stop abruptly with our landings or crashes, that causes then damage, whether it's a broken arm, or we strip out a metal screw, or our flight stack gets busted apart where we break pins, or whatever the damage is. The more weight we have, the more inertia that creates, and the more force that also creates when we do a sudden stop. This frame comes in at 18.51 grams with all the hardware, so the screws and the metal standoffs. You could probably save some weight if you chose to by going to nylon. Maybe you wanted to go to nylon back here and here for strategic purposes. I do think keeping the metal up here is a good idea, just for some of that basic protection. But the frame at 18.5 grams, that's pretty light for a frame of this dimension and size. Also something with this much protection of your electronics and your components. I think that's pretty good. Oftentimes we have frames coming in 25 plus grams, and I think that's just stepping away from what we need in micros. As far as these motors go, I think everybody who builds a micro should try out these motors, and I've got 2 sets of them here. I've got one on this quad and then one of them down here. And I think these motors are something you should try. Now, these motors look just like the BBB motors, and they might be made by BBB, but you won't find, or at least I haven't found, the 6,000 kV variant, only the 7,500 kV variant, which I've actually got the BBB motors on the Nemesis X, the original one I built with 4 individual ESCs. You can go back and look at that if you choose to. And those motors perform very well, although they did sound a bit funny when we had the HD camera on there, but I don't know if that funny is normal or not, or if it was my tune or just the audio and how it came off. But the motors perform very well. They actually, in my opinion, for an 1105 motor, perform very, very well. And they're not super notchy and they're not super noisy because, and I say that because PID tuning isn't really a challenge with this particular motor. I found it to be very normal. It stepped in increments like I expected it to. And once I landed on the tune, I did switch over to PT1 and then I turned off the notch filters. And they do get warm when I'm running them like I run them on 3S. We do have some warmer weather. We're having 80-degree days now, but not so hot that I can't keep my fingers on them, so I'm not necessarily worried that as we get into the heat of the summer months that is going to make a problem for our motors. But these motors come in substantially less if you buy the GemFan version. Matter of fact, you can get them on Amazon with Prime shipping. I think it's for $46.50 or $46.99, versus if you get the BBB version, these motors tend to come anywhere from $14 to $18. So they can get quite expensive when acquiring these, especially when you're getting a set, versus 46 bucks for a set of the GemFan version. And here's a little bit of a closer look at the design. To me, you know, I guess bells could be copied. Oh, magnet didn't hold. But that looks eerily similar. Almost too close to say that BBB isn't making the motors for GemFan, but who am I to say? It just looks and performs the same. And these motors with their full wire length on my scale came out in at 5.95 grams, and when I cut them to length that I needed for an install that these were previously on, they came in at 5.7 grams. So a pretty light motor at that. It's not the lightest, but it is relatively light. I think the lightest motor that I've measured in this category is the DYS 7000 kV motor, and that came in at almost 5.5 grams. So the difference between this and cut down is very, very minimal. But those DYS motors are fairly old. They don't perform nearly as well, and they're a little bit noisy. And the wires they have is that brittle, non-silicone based stuff. At the end of this video, you're going to find 2 other flights, and you can jump ahead to those if you want to see them. And those flights are there for your reference or additional data point to see about flight times for something like this, with this weight, with a 3S 550 battery. And I'll just go ahead and tell you that the last flight that you'll see is kind of an endurance flight. I'm very much cruising, going very slow and steady. And it's a very slow flight. It's not much more than a hover, slightly moving forward. But that flight comes in around 7 minutes. So pretty long flight time if you fly especially slow or an endurance type of flyer. And then there's another flight that's just less aggressive. I didn't change the camera angle for either one of those flights, but I just flew a little less aggressively just to see what the flight time would be like and how much my typical flight shortens a different kind of flight. And that flight comes in around 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So that gives you some additional data points where you can compare flight times or how you might fly versus how I might fly. But I had a good time with this. I think if you're a builder, you should try these motors. I think if you haven't tried a FlexRC build before, I would definitely give that a go. If you have any comments or questions or suggestions, please leave those in the section down below. I appreciate your time, and thanks for watching.